Aeons is a game focused around Gravehold, the last bastion of humanity kept underground. Gravehold is, well, down here and the last safe city because of a discovery of breaches. Breaches are stabilized holes in reality leading to the void, which is the space between realities. The void holds an untapped amount of power that practically regenerates instantly. And breach mages, who are people who can fully realize the power of the breaches and use them for casting and whatnot, are the main people who can tap into it. Unfortunately for Gravehold, they didn't realize there are others that can tap into the breaches. The Nameless, or the Nemesis, depending on who you ask. These are big bad bosses who typically come to Gravehold for one reason: to rip it asunder. They will just show up through the breaches, and it's you and your team's job, or maybe just your job, to push them back or wipe out everything they try to summon before you or Gravehold falls. Now, for your character. We'll be using Garu as an example, and I'll get into the specifics about him in a bit. But you have your player number, in this case, your player 3. That'll be a bit important later. Then you have your health. I'm sure you've played enough games to know, don't let this hit 0. Then you have your charges for your character's special ability, which I'll get to in a bit. And finally, we have your breaches. As you can see, the first breach is already open, but the rest are locked. Now, if we focus on the second breach for a moment, you'll be able to, in its position, spend either 5 money to just open it immediately, or spend 2 to turn it. If you recently turned a breach, which is called focusing the breach, you're able to play a spell to it, but you have to use it on the next turn. Open breaches, you can have spells sit there as long as you want. Now, as for Garu, all characters have a specific starting deck and a starting hand, which is printed on the card below the health and player number. Each character has a special card specifically for them, known as a starter card, and their own special ability. Garu's special card is Torch, a spell that can be cast to either deal 1 damage or focus any breach, which is especially helpful for everyone, but mostly to Garu because of his ability, which is known as Colossal Force. To get access to that ability, you need to gain all 5 of his charges, each of which cost 2 money to gain. So 10 money in total, spread across any number of turns you need. When you use the ability, you consume all of your charges, and you deal 2 damage plus an additional 4 damage for every spell you have on him that you discard, meaning he can deal a maximum of 18 damage all at once, which is enough to wipe out pretty much every minion in the game. And as an added bonus, you can spread that damage however you want. So if one big beefy minion isn't in play with a bunch of little weenies, boom, no more minions. Next up on the list is Desmodia. She holds the signature card Oblivion Shard, a gem, unlike the others. Oblivion Shard gives you 2 money that you can't use to buy a relic or a spell. So that's 2 of the types of cards that you can't use it on, but you can use it on focusing breaches or charges or anything else. As for Desmodia's ability, Tempest Sigil. This lets you destroy another player's opened first or second breach, and then give them a sigil breach in its place. Plus, if they had a spell on that breach when it was destroyed, it goes back to the hand, and then they can prep a spell from their hand onto the sigil breach that was just played. Sigil breaches give +2 to all damage cast to spells cast from it, even if that spell normally didn't do any damage. Now, 3rd and 4th breaches actually give +1 to damage when they're opened, but sigil breaches just blow that out of the water. Next up on the list is Ulgamore, which is actually the shadow, not the dude. I'll get into why that is later. Ulgamore is actually the tank of the group. But you wouldn't really think that based on his starter card alone, Coal Shard. Which, if you have 2 life or less when you use it, it just blows itself up. Which isn't really a good thing because you can't get back anything that's been destroyed. But if you have more than 2 health, you not only do you gain 3 mana, or money, whichever you want to call it, but also a free charge. That's 5 in value, but you also take 2 damage in the process. Which means you want to keep your ability up, keep using your ability as much as possible. Eidolon Shroud, where you just gain 6 health. Nothing fancy to it. But if you are exhausted, you instead heal someone else for 5. Now, when you're exhausted, that's when your health falls to 0. And the moment that happens, not only do you have to lose all of your charges, you also lose one of your breaches, and the Nemesis activates the Unleash effect twice, which is nasty. In addition, while you're exhausted, you can't heal, and stuff can't directly target you, but if you would take damage, instead of you taking damage, Gravehold takes twice the damage instead. And Gravehold only has 30 health, so best to stay out of exhaustion as much as possible. Next up on the list is Mazahedron, who has one of your only ways to heal Gravehold, so keep this guy alive. His starter card is the World Heart Shard, which either just gives you 1 either, which is the actual name for the currency in this game, but nobody calls it that. Or you gain 2 money that you can only use on a card. But, importantly, that card goes to a different person. It gives you a little bump to help you get some big card that you wouldn't normally be able to get, but that goes to someone else. So you could use it to help your friend Ted over there ramp up as fast as he can. Or you could use it to give Mary over there, who has minimal health at this point, some more healing to try to make her stay alive. As for his ability, Under Earth Mantra, it has 2 effects. First, you get any gem costing 4 or less for free. You don't need to pay any either for that. And secondly, Gravehold heals 4, which is, again, nice. Gravehold still can't go above its starting life of 30, but having a heal for it in your back pocket's never a bad thing. And also, free money. Next on the list is Mist, who is similar in role to Garu from earlier. She's a nuker. Her signature card is the Amethyst Paragon, which not only does it give you money, it also allows any ally, so not you, to prep any spell in their hand to any of their breaches. Doesn't matter if they're open or closed. But if that spell's still on the closed breach at the start of their turn, they have to cast it. So. Her power is where it gets interesting. Exalted Brand. You get to fire 3 spells that anybody has prepped. And those spells go back to the hand after they're used, so you can use them again on the next turn. Now, depending on what spells you choose, that can either hit really hard or have some other crazy powerful effect. So, pick your spells carefully. Don't just willy-nilly fire off a bunch of sparks that's not going to help you. Next on the list is Jan Magda, who's another one of those supportive types. His signature card is Illuminate, which, while it's prepped, anytime one of your breaches gets focused or opened, you deal 1 damage for free. And then when you use it, it also deals 1 damage. Yeah, it's like you're tickling them, but death by 1,000 cuts is a thing, so every little bit helps. His ultimate is known as Imperium Ritual, where you get to just grab any card from the supply for free. Doesn't matter if it's that 9-cost card over there in the corner that you've been eyeballing all game, now it's yours. And if all of your breaches are opened, another person gets to take any card from the supply. Could be the same one you took, could be something else, but it goes to the top of their deck, meaning they draw it at the end of their turn, and it's usable on their turn after. Being able to grab just any card you want is amazing. Being able to let another person grab any card they want and get it on their next turn, well, their turn after next, I guess, is amazing. Don't underestimate the power of free stuff. Mage number 7, Quilius. Now, there's actually something interesting with Quilius, as she actually has both her first and second breach open from the start, which is really cool. And also very helpful because she has 2 copies of her starter card, Extinguish. Extinguish deals 1 damage to whatever poor staff you aim it at, which, again, it's 1 damage, so it's not that helpful, but if you actually manage to kill something with it, then you actually get a trophy token, which is visible on the card. As for Quilius's ability, it is Quietus Vow, which just lets you deal 2 damage for every trophy token you have, which technically could be infinite damage, because there is no limit to the number of trophy tokens you can have. Even if the pile you have runs out, you can just use anything else instead. I guess you're only limited by the number of minions you're going up against, which means either you're starved for trophy tokens or you're drowning in them, depending on who you're fighting. The last breach mage of this box is Gex. Again, her breaches are a bit weird, because she has her second breach open, like Quilius, but she actually doesn't have a first breach. So she's going to be 1 breach down the entire game. She's actually also a pseudo-support with the only heal-based ability in the entire box. Her starter card, Shattered Geode, gives you 1 money, and also lets you steal the top card of any player's discard. Well, I say steal, you could ask, or you just say mine. And that card is added to your hand, which means you could use it immediately. But it's especially useful because of her second ability, or her actual ability, Vimcraft Oath, which lets you heal an ally for 2 and have them draw a card. And also says you may destroy 2 cards in hand with a cost of 0. All starter cards, which are the cards you've been seeing all this time, as well as sparks, which are spells cast deal 1 damage, and crystals, which are gems that give 1 money, they all cost 0. So if someone doesn't want them clogging up their deck because they're going for a specific strategy, they can hand them off to you and you can blow them up. As well as giving a free heal in the draw, which is nice. Now that you know who you can play as, let's see how you can play as them. Now, the player turn consists of the casting phase, then the main phase, and then the draw phase. During the casting phase, which is before everything else, you get to cast any number of spells you have prepped. If they're in open breaches, you can just not cast them. If you're in a closed breach, they have to be cast. When you cast a spell, it goes straight to the discard. Then once you're done casting, you move into your main phase, where you can resolve any of the following actions as many times as you want, or as many times as you can, and in any order. Play a gem or relic, buy a card, buy a charge, focus or open a breach, prep a spell to a breach, or resolve a while prepped effect or a to discard effect. And then, once you're all done with your main phase, on to the draw phase. Any gems and relics you played during your main phase are sent to your discard in any order you want. And then you draw 5 cards from the top of your deck. You draw cards from the top of your deck until you have 5 in your hand. You don't discard cards in your hand that you haven't used, they just stick around. And if you don't have enough cards, take your discard pile and flip it over. No shuffling there, folks. And now we have the only deck you do shuffle on a regular basis, the turn order deck. Now, the deck's contents will vary based on how many players you have, so we'll just get to that when we get to that. But we have the types of cards you can see. Going from top across, then bottom across, we have the single player turn. If this card comes up and you're player 4, guess what? You're up. Then there's the wild turn, which is technically an extra addition if you're having a bit of trouble running through it. If a wild turn comes up, you can either just choose which mage gets to go, or the way I've done it a few times, roll a dice to determine which mage goes. And then we have the ever-dreaded Nemesis turn. There's always going to be 2 of these in the deck. And whenever the Nemesis goes, bad news is sure to follow. Then we have the split turnover cards. Again, this is a variant rule for 4 players exclusively, so we're not going to be showing it in this video, or in any of our videos really. But if these come up, you get to, in this case, 1 or 2. So player 1 or player 2 takes their turn, and they take the split player 1 and 2 token. The next time a 1 or 2 shows up, the token goes back to the pile and the other player goes. There's always going to be 2 copies of each split card in the deck. So you don't run into a scenario where player 1 goes and then player 2 needs to wait for the rest of the round. Alright, now you know who you are and how you fight, but you can't really know how to fight without, having someone to fight. And Gravehold kind of frowns upon you fighting other mages. So, on to the Nemesis. This big boy is here for one reason and one reason only, like I said before, to turn Gravehold to rubble. If it managed to either take out every single player, exhaust you all, or drops Gravehold down to 0, you lose. Or it could have other loss conditions built into the Nemesis, which is a case-by-case basis. But you win by either taking the Nemesis down to 0, which could be annoying depending on who that is, or exhausting them, which is you run through the entire Nemesis deck until they have no cards in their deck and no cards on their field. Doesn't matter how much health they have at that point, they've lost. They're out of options, they have to run. Now, the Nemesis has 3 different types of cards in their deck. Minions. They start with a health value, in the case of Grubber here, 5. That health drops to 0, they're discarded. But minions also have a persistent effect, meaning at the start of every Nemesis turn, while it's on the field, the thing happens. So typically you want to drop these things as fast as possible, because like we said with some of the spells, every little bit of damage adds up. Now on to the powers. These start with power tokens on them equal to their number, which, in the case of this card, is 3. At the start of every Nemesis turn, it loses 1 power token. When it's out of power tokens, it activates. Some powers have a to discard in them. In the case of Seismic Roar here, you gotta spend 6 money all at once. But if you manage to do that, the power just goes away with no effect. So you're going to want to have someone on your team capable of generating a ton of money to just make sure those things never go off. But there are some powers whose costs don't involve money, or just can't be discarded at all. So you're just going to need to plan for those when they happen. And finally, you have attacks. There's no dodging these, there's no avoiding them. It comes into play, it happens, and then it goes away. And again, depending on the attack, they can be brutal, but you just need to learn how to roll with it. The first Nemesis on the table is the Umbra Titan, which is actually difficulty 3, the easiest Nemesis I currently have. But don't let that difficulty fool you, this worm will tear you to shreds if he gets the chance. Now, unlike other Nemesis, he actually starts with 8 Nemesis counters, or Nemesis tokens, depending on who you ask. Doesn't matter, same thing. And it has effects that make it lose tokens. Now, as part of its additional rules, if it has no tokens, it collapses Gravehold from below, causing an immediate lose. So you want to make sure this thing stays topped up on tokens, because you cannot put them back. The Umbra Titan starts with 70 health, which I find is relatively standard for Nemesis health. Then, its Unleash effect. Anytime something says it unleashes, this happens. Either it loses a token, or if this is its first turn this round, a player takes 2 damage. You choose the player. If it's its second turn, Gravehold takes 2 damage. So this guy's just gonna keep chewing away at you unless you make it lose tokens, and losing tokens means Gravehold dies faster. Nemesis also have an increased difficulty option if this isn't enough for you. In the case of Umber Titan, he loses 3 of his tokens right off the bat, which could be a major problem if some of his cards are allowed to stick around, because he can lose tokens really fast if you give him a chance. So, kick this worm to the curb. We don't have a big enough bird to eat it, so I'm sure you can figure something out. Next on the list is the Hollow Crown, who's difficulty 5. Now, note his health total. 1. Sounds like you just punt this thing away, but unfortunately he is completely invincible. You can't hurt him. Instead, the only way you defeat him is by taking out all of his acolytes, which have 11 health. If at the end of any turn there are no acolytes in play, you just win. He walks away. Whenever an acolyte dies, a new one immediately spawns in. Its unleash is to resolve the blood magic effect of the acolyte in play with the most health. Now, blood magic is basically like persistent, except it has to be manually activated. So they don't just auto-activate by themselves, which is really good because some of the effects are really annoying. But blood magic effects, for the most part, make the acolytes die in the process. But then there's the increased difficulty, which resolves every blood magic effect and stops them from taking damage from them. Which, if there are enough minions in play, is obnoxious. Now, he actually starts with 2 acolytes in play, and there are cards that can make him spawn more. But there is a silver lining here, because remember how I said where if you get exhausted, he unleashes twice? In the case of Hollow Crown, that doesn't happen. Instead of unleashing twice, Gravehold just takes 4 damage, and that's it. You still will resolve all the other exhaustion effects, but at least you don't need to deal with a ton of blood magic going off just because you ended up dead. Yeah, the Hollow Crown is here to inspire awe in the civilians of Gravehold and turn them to its cause. Punt this oversized crown holder to the curb and make sure people know that blood magic isn't to be trifled with. Next up is Gate Witch, a 7 difficulty nemesis who can mess with time. Now, Gate Witch starts with 1 nemesis token and gains more as it unleashes. If it has 5 or more tokens at the end of its turn, and it's only taken 1 turn so far, it just gets its turn back later. It shuffles the nemesis card back into the deck, and then it loses 4 tokens. Now, being forced to run 3 nemesis turns in a round instead of 2 could be disastrous, depending on how the game state is. And its increased difficulty makes that even worse, because it only loses 3 tokens instead of 4. Yeah, time manipulation's never fun to deal with, but I guess you need to make sure your clocks are set right and punt this thing back into the breach that it came from. Now, the last nemesis we have is the Magus of Cloaks, who is also difficulty 7. But instead of time manipulation, it has layers and layers of dark energy surrounding it. Even though its health is 35, which is pathetic compared to most nemesis, it's really annoying to kill. It starts with 4 nemesis tokens, it can't go below 2, and it can't have more than 8. But anytime it takes damage, the damage is reduced by the number of tokens it has, and then it loses 1. And whenever it unleashes, it either gains 2 tokens, or Gravehold takes 2 damage. The increased difficulty, it can't have less than 3 or more than 9. This thing can be extraordinarily annoying to deal with, because just trying to death by 1,000 cuts it will not work. Make sure, I guess for this guy, make sure your lights are on and push the darkness back once again. He'll be back, he always is, but make sure the Wrath of the Sun is always there to meet him. you can't go and fight a massive boss with just your starter gear at your disposal. Everyone knows that is going to fail. So you have to set up the supply. Now, there are 2 ways to go about it. One is the way that's actually supposed to be done, and one's the way where you just don't feel like it and just want to play the way you want to. Now, in the box, there are a set of randomizer cards with a special silver border. These you need to shuffle into a deck, and then start dealing out. Keep dealing until you have exactly 3 different gems, 2 different relics, and 4 different spells. If you start dealing and maybe say get a 4th gem, just throw it to the bottom of the deck and keep going. Then once you have all your cards set up, and this is a house rule I made, each person can pick one of them, throw it back into the deck, and get a new one. So let's say a card like, I don't know, Volcanic Glass, just as a random card, comes into play, and your friend right over there decides, nah, I don't want it. Throw it back and get a new gem. Every person gets to do that once. Then once that's all done, just place the actual cards on top of the randomizer cards. There are 7 copies of each gem, 5 copies of each relic, and 5 copies of each spell. You can't buy the randomizers, by the way, so don't bother. The way you play if you don't feel like doing randomizers, you just pick the cards you want. I can't really stop you, but it's more fun when you don't know what to expect.